Joe Walsh's life has been full of amazing highs and terrible lows. Walsh's story is full of tragedy and strength. His mother's classical training made him interested in music at a young age, and he lost his father and daughter, which was very sad. Even though he battled addiction and became famous with the Eagles, he carried a heavy load that not many people could see. At age 76, Walsh is finally telling the truth about his hard times as a rock star, proving what his friends and fans have always thought about his private fights. Keep listening to find out. Joe Walsh got his start in music in a time of both talent and tragedy. Joseph Fiddler Walsh was born on November 20, 1947, in Wichita, Kansas. Music was more than just a hobby for him. He was born with it. His classically trained mother taught him to love music when he was very young. But when his father died suddenly in a plane crash, it left a hole in Joe and his mother's lives. They moved around a lot before they found a stable home in Montclair, New Jersey. Young Joe took his first real steps into music in Montclair. He learned to play the guitar when he was 10 years old, because he liked the sound and energy of rock bands like the Sen and the Beatles. Even though he played the oboe in the school band, his real love was the electric guitar, letting his feelings and creative spirit flow through it. Joe's life took him to Kent State University as he grew up, where he began to dream of a life dedicated to music. He was already playing with Ohio bands at this point, which helped him improve his skills and confidence. While at Kent State, he joined a band called the Measles. Soon after, he became the lead singer for the James Gang, a hard rock trio. They became a big deal in Northeast Ohio very quickly. Fleetwood Mac, The Who, and even Led Zeppelin have played with them before. But there was still darkness on the path. Walsh was at Kent State on May 4, 1970, when National Guard troops opened fire on a peaceful student protest, killing 4 and hurting many more. The event changed Joe's life, and left an indelible mark on his heart. As a Gold Star son, Joe was already used to loss. When Joe was a baby, his flight instructor father died on the job. The tragedy at Kent State made him think even more about life and peace. Years later, on the 50th anniversary of that terrible day, Joe Walsh thought back and talked about how shocked and hurt he was to see his classmates die from gunfire. The memory made him think of how fragile the balance is between violence and hope. In his music and in his sense of purpose, the events of that day would always be with him. After a lot of experience and a fresh look at things, Walsh eventually left the James Gang and started a new journey by forming the band Barnstorm with Joe Vitale and Kenny Passarelli. After his time with the James Gang, in 1972, Joe Walsh was at a creative crossroads. Instead of joining a well-known group or sticking to a single genre, he chose to go his own way. Walsh put together a new band called Barnstorm with his college friend Joe Vitale on drums and Kenny Passarelli on bass. It wasn't just a project. The mix of rock, folk, jazz, and even some Caribbean style was a brave experiment with sound. That year's self-titled debut album was a big change that showed how talented Walsh was not only as a guitarist, but also as an adventurous composer. Walsh's daring creativity found an audience that really liked the album, even though it didn't top the charts. Tracks like Turn to Stone and Mother Says stood out because they showed how smart his lyrics were and how creatively he played the guitar. Fans of Walsh's music saw Barnstorm as more than just a band. It was a look into how he was growing as an artist, and a place where he could experiment with his sound. During this time, other musicians, including the members of the Eagles, started to notice Walsh's skills. They would later join his band. Barnstorm's second album, The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get, came out in 1973. It had the hit single Rocky Mountain Way. With its catchy slide guitar and laid-back groove, the song made Walsh a famous solo artist, and was a turning point in his career. Even though Barnstorm broke up in 1974, it had a huge impact on Walsh's career. Having the freedom to be creative with Barnstorm for a few years gave him the confidence and skills to grow as a musician. This chapter was very important in making him the artist he was to become. It set him up for future success with the Eagles, and cemented his place in rock history. The Barnstorm broke up the next year, and Joe Walsh was at the top of his game when he joined the Eagles, one of the most important rock bands of the 1970s. His timing was just right, which fits with the band's move towards a heavier guitar-driven sound, and the departure of founding member Bernie Leadon. Walsh had a magnetic stage presence, played the guitar like no one else, and had a subtle musicality that fit the Eagles' changing style perfectly. This partnership not only helped the band reach new heights, but it also made Walsh famous all over the world. Walsh was very important to the Eagles' famous 1976 album Hotel California, which came out soon after he joined. He played some of the most famous guitar duets in rock history, especially with Don Felder on the title track. Hotel California's haunting riff is still one of the most famous guitar solos of all time, drawing people in with its mysterious beauty. Life in the Fast Lane, a song that Walsh brought to the Eagles, was based on a simple but catchy guitar riff, became a huge hit that showed how good Walsh was as a guitarist and songwriter. It showed off the band's new edgier sound, which was different from their folk rock roots, and more rock-like. Walsh's powerful guitar playing helped the band change their style, which helped them become stadium rock icons and reach a wider audience. His daring spirit and creative flair gave the Eagles a boost, and made his friendship with bandmates Glenn Frey and Don Henley stronger. Even though the Eagles were already successful before Walsh joined, it was after he joined that they had their most popular and well-reviewed period. When Joe Walsh joined the Eagles, their famous song Hotel California was already making waves around the world. But behind all of his success was a sad part of his life that not many people knew about. They had a daughter together, Emma, in 1972. Walsh had married Stephanie Rhodes a few years before, in 1971. There was no one left in their family, but tragedy struck in 1974. A careless driver caused a terrible car accident that hurt little Emma's head very badly. Even though everyone tried, she died that very night, leaving her parents in a lot of pain. It's so sad that Joe was on tour when the accident happened. He rushed home to deal with his unimaginable loss. For Walsh and his wife Stephanie, the accident was the start of a rough time. As they dealt with their grief, their relationship began to fall apart, which eventually led to their divorce. Joe was in a lot of pain after losing Emma, and he had a hard time getting through the dark times. He put all of his sadness into his music. In 1974, he released Song for Emma, a very personal song he wrote in honor of his daughter. In an interview with Rolling Stone in 2016, Walsh talked about how Emma's death has changed his life. He admitted that he was very angry at God and the world, which made him have a so-what attitude that made him do bad things to himself. To feel better, he turned to drugs and alcohol, which numbed his pain and blocked out the truth he would not face. Even though he was having a hard time, Joe found a way to remember his daughter. He built a small memorial fountain in North Boulder Park to honor Emma. It was a quiet place for him to think and connect with her spirit. Joe Walsh did everything he could to live the rock and roll life. It was normal to stay up late, party hard, and do things that hurt yourself. The fact that he was crazy didn't stop him from being very successful, even though he was very close to ruining himself. Walsh knew something had to change in the end, though his way of life was not sustainable, no matter how exciting it all seemed, and he was about to snap. It's a better place to work in the music business now that it's changed over time. Things were very different when Walsh was at his best, though hedonism was almost expected, and the constant stress of touring made drugs and alcohol easy to get. For many musicians, abusing drugs was like a rite of passage, and a lot of artists got caught up in its destructive cycle. This cost the business world a lot of talented people. Some people died way too soon because they couldn't get away from their addiction. But Joe Walsh did something that not many people do. He made the choice to face his addiction straight on. It was hard and complicated for him to get sober. There will be no overnight change. In an honest interview with Billboard in 2018, Walsh talked about how drugs and alcohol had become his higher power, a crutch that made him feel alone, and brought out the worst in him. He became angry and resentful, which made people avoid him and hurt his career. Like many performers, Walsh used alcohol to help him deal with stage fright at first. It was scary to think about going on stage without it, but in 1993, he finally made the decision that would change his life. He quit drinking. He was afraid that getting sober would make him less creative or less able to perform. But he took the plunge anyway. Walsh told his story in his 2012 song One Day at a Time, which gave listeners an honest look at the ups and downs of addiction. In a 2016 interview with Rolling Stone, Walsh talked about his problems and how he kept up a front for years to hide how much his addiction was hurting him. But in the end, it was too much for him, and he went down darker paths that almost killed him. He might have been saved by hitting rock bottom, giving him the push he needed to get things back on track before it was too late. Sad to say, so many of his friends and classmates couldn't avoid that fate. Joe Walsh brought more than just great guitar skills to the Eagles when he joined in 1975. People knew him for living a crazy, unpredictable life. His hotel room adventures were just as famous as his music, which made some people wonder if he'd fit in with the Eagles' more laid-back style. The band had their doubts behind closed doors. They were afraid that Walsh's wild partying would go against their image. In the end, his wild behavior did get the band kicked out of a few places, but Walsh's musical skill could not be denied. With his guitar riffs, energy and songs, he gave the Eagles' sound a new edge. Years later, Walsh told the Daily Mail that his wild behavior wasn't just a phase of being a rock star, they were a cover for deep-seated fear. Walsh often felt like he had something to prove when he was around legends like Glenn Frey and Don Henley, who were known for writing great songs and having great voices. This feeling of not being safe led him to act recklessly and abuse drugs. Walsh's life got worse after the Eagles broke up in 1980. Without the structure of the band, his drug use got worse, and it got worse when he was dating Stevie Nicks. The way they were connected turned into a bad cycle of partying and using drugs. Over time, even Nicks admitted that their relationship was fueled by their drug use. When the Eagles got back together in 1994, Walsh finally faced his inner demons. Friends in the band, especially Timothy B. Schmidt, told him he needed to get help because they were worried about his health. It was more than just a chance to play music again at this get-together. Walsh got the drive he needed to take back his life. He accepted being sober. It was the hardest battle he had ever fought in his life. The alcohol had made him think he couldn't handle life without it, but his friends and the ideas of Alcoholics Anonymous helped him rebuild his life day by day. Walsh's story of getting sober has become what people know him for today. Even though he was famous and successful at his peak with the Eagles, it's his personal growth that really stands out. His work with the First Step to Recovery Treatment Center shows how determined he is to stay sober. It's a reminder that even famous people can change. Stevie Nicks, the beautiful voice and heart of Fleetwood Mac, once told a story about love and loss that many of us can relate to. Joe Walsh, the famous Eagles guitarist, is at the center of this story. Nicks often calls him the love of her life. They fell in love in the 1980s, and it was like a rock and roll fairy tale. Two famous musicians at the top of their games were drawn together by a bond so strong that Nicks said she loved Walsh more than anyone else. It's more than her music and her job. They hit it off right away when they met at a hotel bar. Nick fell in love with Walsh right away. Their love was strong, passionate, and filled them up completely. But, as with many stories told in the rush of fame, darker forces made their relationship more difficult. There was a long shadow of drug abuse over their time together. As much as they were united by love, they were also united by a bad way of life that slowly destroyed their relationship. It's no secret that Nicks and their addiction problems caused them to lose sight of everything else. Walsh had to make the hard choice to leave in the end. Nicks was completely broken after his heart broke. It took a long time and was painful for her to heal, but she did it, and she learned from that rough time. The song Has Anyone Ever Written Anything for You, a haunting tribute to the love they shared, shows how much she felt and how much she loved him. When Walsh thought back on their time together, it was both tender and clear, even after everything was over. Even though he saw Nicks as more like a brother or sister, he called her his soulmate, and not just a lover. The chaos and pain of their shared struggles brought them together. Their love for each other was very strong, but their addiction got too heavy for them, and they eventually split up. In the history of rock, supergroups have come and gone, often quickly becoming popular and then disappearing. Some, like Cream, became legends, while others fell apart just as quickly because of egos and different ideas. A different group was Joe Walsh's The Best in the early 1990s. They did not become famous or fall apart in a big way. Instead, they disappeared as quickly as they came, leaving only a short and strange trail. It was the early 1990s, and Walsh put together a great group of musicians. Walsh was famous for his work with the Eagles. Don't think this was just any lineup. He worked with people like John Entwistle, Keith Emerson, Simon Phillips, and Rick Livingston. Because they said they were the best, everyone had very high hopes for them. In September 1990, they went on a short tour of Japan, where they played songs from the careers of each member. Eagles' Life in the Fast Lane, Steely Dan's Reelin' in the Years, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Fanfare for the Common Man were just a few of the hits on the set list. People who didn't like the tour were quick to say what they thought. Rolling Stone said that Rick Livingston, who was the only member who wasn't very well known, had a hard time keeping up with the legacy of Don Henley, Roger Daltrey, Donald Fagen, and Greg Lake. Even so, the best had left their mark, even if only for a short time. In a time when technology has changed the music business, Joe Walsh chose a different path. Walsh went against the grain with his 11th solo album, Analog Man. He didn't like the polished digital sound that most modern music has. Instead, he wanted to get back to the raw, unprocessed essence of the past by using analog recording methods again. It wasn't just an album that Walsh was making, he was also sending a message. People tell stories about Walsh's life in rock and roll. He lived the rock star dream to the fullest in the 1970s and 1980s. Wild parties, trashed hotel rooms, and a fast-paced way of life were all signs of the decade's excesses. He became a symbol of rock's rebellious spirit, but all that crazy behavior hit a musician with amazing skills. Some of rock's most famous guitar riffs and songs were made with bands like the Eagles and the James Gang. This put him in the same league as guitar greats like Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix. Walsh was successful, but his personal life was always on the edge, because his drug use was hurting his health and threatening to ruin his career. In the late 1980s, Walsh was at a turning point. The life of rock and roll excess, which used to be fun, had turned into a nightmare. Hitting rock bottom woke me up in a big way. Walsh knew he had to make a big change if he wanted to stay alive and do well. He set out on the path to sobriety with a lot of determination. It was a long and rough road, but it gave me a new start. Walsh found a clarity and peace of mind that he hadn't had in years when he stopped drinking. This change in himself not only changed his life, but it also changed his music. When I got sober, I started writing songs that were deeper and more about myself. He used music as therapy to work through his feelings and tell his story in an open and honest way. Analog Man was what came out of this trip. Not only was it a return to analog sound, it was also a return to the real thing. Walsh's renewed love for the craft was clear on the album, which was recorded with a great group of musicians that included Jeff Lynne and Ringo Starr. Many parts of the album were produced in a clean way by Lynne, but Walsh made sure the music still had a natural, raw sound. He spoke out against how much technology is used in modern music, instead aiming for a sound that felt real and lived in. The themes of Analog Man are very close to home. The lyrics talk about gratitude, personal growth, and reflection. They show what was going through Walsh's mind as he dealt with his past and embraced his present. Walsh's humor and insight are on full display in the title track, which makes fun of the difficulties of navigating the digital world. But it's the album's quieter moments that show how vulnerable he is. Being sober had started a new part of his life, and it let him write songs that were honest and self-aware in a way that touched people deeply. Walsh was honest in interviews about how getting sober had not only saved his life, but also made him love music again. He admitted that he had tried to follow the latest trends for a while, but in the end he realized that staying true to himself was more important. Walsh made the album Analog Man to honor that realization. It was a record that loved the past while also being firmly rooted in the lessons of the present.